Every athlete leaves something behind. Not just records, but moments that changed the way the game felt. Some stories are loud. This one isn't. Tonight, we slow it all down. And listen. This is The Quiet Rise of Tiger Woods, a cinematic journey through greatness, loss, and redemption. The wind moves softly across a quiet street in Cypress, California. Streetlights humming, lawns still. Somewhere, a sprinkler ticks in the distance like a metronome no one hears. And in one backyard, past rows of sleeping houses, a boy, no taller than a golf bag, stands barefoot in the grass and doesn't move. He's holding a golf club. It's too big for him, but he doesn't mind. He's still, focused. His eyes aren't on anything. And also, everything. He's 2 years old, too young to be thinking this hard, too small to grip anything with purpose. But somehow, there's purpose here. In the silence, in the way he shifts his stance, in the way the club taps the earth. Most children dream in color. Loud dreams, running, laughing, colliding with the world like it's made of pillows and invention. But this dream is quiet, a pulse beneath the lawn, a whisper on the green. It began when he saw it on television. Saw men dressed in white and green, swinging with precision, grace, and stillness. And something inside the boy reached out, not to the sport, but to the silence behind it. Because golf was not chaos. It was control, and that's what called to him. His father stood watching. Earl Woods, a man carved from rules and wars. A man who knew how to teach, how to command. But tonight, he doesn't speak. He lets the moment happen. A little boy, a heavy club, a backyard thick with the Cape Jasmine air of Southern California. Some say Tiger Woods was born with a gift. But maybe it wasn't a gift. Maybe it was a need. Because even at 2, he wasn't trying to play. He was trying to perfect. And that's different. There's no noise in this beginning. No crowds. No trophies. No expectations. Just a boy and a father. A camera on a tripod. A sky turning slowly from dusk to night. Those early videos show it all. Not in swings, but in stares. In the way the child doesn't laugh after a shot. Doesn't look for praise. Just nods, resets, and swings again. We don't often think of greatness as something quiet. But this story, it didn't rise up with claps. It arrived like breath on glass. Soft, unmistakable. And in that still night, somewhere beneath the arch of a hibiscus tree, the future had already begun to speak. It just hadn't raised its voice yet. Before Tiger was Tiger, there was Earl. A voice like gravel underfoot. A gaze that didn't blink. He wasn't tall, but he stood like he'd seen too many things to ever be shaken. Vietnam had taught him about focus, about discipline, about how to make a mind sharp enough to cut through anything, even doubt. And when Tiger was born, Earl saw more than just a son. He saw a mission, not with shouting, not with brute force, but with certainty. In those earliest days, it wasn't about winning. It was about wiring. Repeating drills until joy became rhythm. Until rhythm became instinct. Earl didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. When he spoke, it was final. When he watched, it was whole. Mornings in Cyprus began before the sun rose, before the birds had even decided whether to sing. Tiger, barely able to lift the club, would stumble sleepy-eyed onto carpet or grass. It didn't matter. The swing was the same. The feedback was the same. Good. Do it again. Hours passed like minutes. Minutes passed like rituals. The tape recorder whirred. The blinds were shut. The world was small. Just a boy, a swing, and a father carving something invisible into place. Sometimes it felt warm. Sometimes it didn't. Because love, in that house, didn't always look like hugs. It looked like deliberate correction. Like corners smoothed with hard hands. It looked like expectations disguised as encouragement. And Tiger, he followed. Not just because he loved his father, but because his world had been shaped by that love. To obey wasn't weakness. It was belonging. Their connection wasn't soft, but it was complete. They moved in code, in eye contact, in repetitions that said everything without having to speak. There were fireside stories told in the kitchen. Not fairy tales, promises. Earl telling his son, "You will transcend this game. You will move mountains. One day, they will compare you only to gods." Tiger never asked why. He just nodded. At 5, he was out driving grown men. At 6, he was on national television, hitting shots with a calm that aged him beyond recognition. But calm doesn't mean peace. Already, there were cracks inside, invisible to cameras, impossible to articulate to teachers or friends. He couldn't explain why the world felt heavy. Why he didn't really feel like other children. Golf was not a hobby. It was the air he was allowed to breathe. Sometimes, he'd win and feel nothing. Sometimes, he'd lose and feel like the whole sky might collapse around him. Inside the silence was pressure. Sacred, unrelenting, because Earl believed pressure created clarity. And clarity begat greatness. The father saw the son not as a mirror of himself, but as something more divine. More historical, a vessel, and the boy carried it all. Without question, without pause, without knowing what it might cost him one day. Even now, looking back, most of it can't be parsed into moments. It was atmosphere. It was a boy coached by a man who had seen war and decided that changing the world was now his next assignment. Tiger didn't resent it, not yet. He only knew that love, in their house, walked hand in hand with preparation. So he trained, always trained, even when there was no tournament, even when there were no eyes. Because becoming a legend had already begun to replace being a son. And even as cameras blinked and magazines took notice, the boy and his father still met in the same small space. One watching, one swinging, neither saying much, but both knowing what the other meant. Golf is a lonely game. It doesn't clap when you walk up. It doesn't shout when you swing. It waits, in silence, just to show you who you are. At school, Tiger was different. Not just talented, different. His skin was brown in a sea of white. His last name was Woods, but the rooms he entered felt like deserts. Dry, distant, too quiet even for a game built on silence. He wore the discomfort like a collar, tight and buttoned too high. Other children were curious, but curiosity often turns to isolation. Golf didn't help. It was a world of pressed slacks, private clubs, unwritten rules passed down in whispers. It didn't have space for a kid like him, not really. Every tournament felt colder than the last. He'd walk past locker rooms where the laughter stopped when he entered. He felt the eyes, the half-welcome, the tight smiles. But he never flinched, because when Tiger stepped onto the green, it wasn't about comfort. It was about precision. Headed up not by crowds, but by something quieter, a fire he kept for himself. On the course, he answered with focus, with form, with grace earned under fluorescent lights and a father's hand steady on a camera. He learned early that brilliance doesn't need permission. Still, being unseen has weight. He found a rhythm in the routine. Wake early, practice, school, homework, practice more. Tournaments in strange towns. Awards that felt heavy but not warm. Wins that earned applause but not connection. He was learning how to be alone in plain sight. Sometimes, after a match, he'd sit on the passenger side of the car, eating fast food in silence while Earl reviewed his swing or his stance. They didn't dissect emotions. They dissected aim, technique, discipline. The rest? Unspoken. He understood what the world saw, a marvel, a black and Asian boy crushing records in a game that had never asked for his presence. But that image wasn't his reflection. It was a mask the public built, one headline at a time. Inside, he was still a boy. Still wondering if being great meant being apart. Still wondering if victory always came with a room that emptied when the cameras shut off. There was one tournament, age 12, where he won against teenagers, some nearly grown. They shook his hand, said, "Good game," but their eyes never softened. Not really. He stood on the edge of the putting green after the ceremony. Alone, holding the trophy like it might float away. Earl was in the distance, talking to a reporter. And for a moment, Tiger looked up at the sky, not in triumph, but in question. Was this what it would always feel like? The cost of being first, of being best, was that no path had made room for you. You had to cut it yourself. And cutting through the silence meant learning how to live inside it. He didn't quit. He didn't even consider it. Because the swing silenced everything else. One club, one pin, one breath held through motion. Golf couldn't love him, but it couldn't lie to him either. It told the truth with every stroke. A truth Tiger could control. And so, even in the loneliest moments, he stayed. Because the green may not make you feel welcome, but it always lets you play. By the time he was 11, Tiger Woods had already won 6 junior world championships. That number didn't feel real. And maybe it wasn't, because he wasn't just winning. He was dismantling expectations, one tournament at a time. Kids twice his size, with country club coaches and custom irons. Beaten by a quiet boy with a swing built in the backyard and eyes that didn't flinch. But it didn't feel like victory. Not really. It felt like motion, like doing what was expected of him, like punching a clock made out of trophies. The more he won, the more he disappeared behind it all. People began to ask questions. Not about who he was, but about what he'd become. A prodigy. A phenom. Headlines called him, the chosen one. The future of the game. He heard those headlines from the backseat of a car. Eating sandwiches wrapped in foil. Watching his father nod silently at newspaper clippings turned into trophies. But fame didn't feel like music. It felt like static. He was 15 when he hit national television. Bright lights, soft couches, hosts asking him how it felt to be different. He didn't have the words he wanted then. So he smiled, answered politely, laughed on cue, and somewhere underneath all that rehearsal, something inside him tugged. He didn't dislike fame. He just didn't recognize it as real. The long drives back from tournaments were quieter now. Earl still coached, corrected, praised when needed. But something else lingered under the surface. Uncertainty, maybe. Resistance. Not rebellion. Not yet. But Tiger was growing into a mind of his own. And that mind began to wonder. Is this my dream, or his? In hotel rooms, while his father slept, he'd lie awake and watch the ceiling shift with the lights of passing cars. There were fantasies, small ones. What would it feel like to sleep in on a Saturday? To hang out at the movies with friends? To have a weekend that wasn't constructed around scores and tea times? He never allowed those thoughts to stay long. But they came, because even prodigies get tired. There was one night, halfway through his 15th year, when he buried his clubs in the closet and told his father he didn't want to practice. Earl didn't yell. He sat down, slow. And he said it again, what he had always said. You'll change the world, son. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a question. It was a truth, handed down like a medal. And Tiger, still hungry for meaning, still unsure of everything, nodded. He unzipped the bag and began again. But something had shifted. Not broken, not yet, but bent. He was still winning, still breaking records, still leaving fields in shambles behind him. But now, there was another edge behind every smile. A hesitation behind the yes. He loved the game, but the game was beginning to feel like a contract. He tried to talk to friends about it, but they didn't understand. How could they? They saw the front page. The medals. The swing. Not the weight. But Tiger learned early how to hide what didn't serve the mission. He kept showing up, kept swinging, and in doing so, kept reaching a level no one his age was anywhere near. At 17, he stood behind the tee box at yet another junior final. Reporters pressed close. Kids watched with awe. Coaches whispered to each other about professional potential. But Tiger simply stared down the fairway. Through the wind, through the noise, through the part of him that still wondered if joy would ever come back to this grind. He took the shot anyway. Because greatness doesn't wait for joy. And destiny doesn't ask how you feel. It just watches and keeps moving. In 1994, Tiger Woods arrived at Stanford. 18 years old, tall but not imposing, quiet but not shy. The kind of stillness that makes people step aside without knowing why. He walked across campus like a shadow with purpose, less student, more question mark. He was almost famous, but not famous yet. There was a buzz around him. Not loud, but steady. Coaches called him a once-in-a-generation player. Professors weren't sure what to call him. He was a student, technically. But even among the overachievers of Palo Alto, Tiger seemed set apart. He studied economics, wore the same Stanford hoodie more days than not, ate in the dining hall, joked with teammates, scrolled through pages of biomechanics before practice. But if anyone asked who he really was, the silence spoke first. He wasn't cold, just contained, used to holding pieces of himself in reserve. Golf swallowed most of his college life. Tournaments, qualifiers, conditioning. He'd wake before campus stirred. Walk to the range alone. Hit balls until his hands went numb. Not to win, to understand, because the game kept changing, and so did he. Somewhere amid the golden California mornings and thick stacks of textbooks, he began to re-engineer his swing. Not because his old one stopped working, but because he needed something more repeatable. More durable. More his. Everyone noticed. The release point, the tempo, the way he compressed the ball with what seemed like anger disguised as grace. It scared some people, inspired others, but Tiger wasn't thinking about them. He was chasing a feel. A pattern. A swing he could trust with his eyes closed. Meanwhile, the wins kept coming. Pac-10 championships, U.S. amateur titles, rounds that looked like poetry written under pressure. But inside, there was distance, a fracture between the boy everyone thought they knew, and the private man trying to shape his future in silence. There were parties on campus. Tiger rarely stayed long. He smiled, nodded, listened. But connection came harder in rooms where no one understood what it felt like to carry destiny on your back. Still, there were windows, narrow ones, where he could be more than the myth. Walking to class in the fog. Sitting on the edge of the practice green with a friend who didn't ask about golf. Moments when laughter wasn't scheduled. But they didn't last, because the demands kept rising. More press, more speculation. More whispers about when he'd finally go pro. Everyone wanted a future he hadn't yet agreed to. But he listened, and each round, each swing, each quiet moment reading the break of a green, he began to answer the question they didn't even know they were asking. Yes, he was coming, not because they pushed him, because he was ready. When he won his third straight U.S. amateur, people stopped calling him a prodigy. He wasn't promise anymore. He was arrival. And in that final year at Stanford, just before everything changed, he stepped off the course on a warm afternoon, looking less like a student, and more like a storm quietly gathering itself on the edge of history. August 1996. A press conference room hums with the quiet buzz of microphones and breath-held questions. Reporters sit ready, pens perched. And then, he enters. Tiger Woods, 20 years old. A name that was once whispered is now spoken with certainty. With expectation. With weight. He announces it simply. I'm turning pro today. No theatrics. No tears. Just that calm, efficient tone. The same one he's always used when facing a challenge. There's a smile on his face. Measured. Tight. Like it knows something the room doesn't. The questions come fast, careful. Why now? He answers smooth but short. Because it was time. Because the game was waiting. Because the old chapters had already turned themselves. Behind him, agents smile. Nike nods. Other sponsors circle like satellites, ready to orbit something gravitational. But beneath the press lights, Tiger is thinking of something else. Of drills in the dark. Off-camera drives through back roads after junior tournaments. The way a swing feels when it connects just right, long before the applause ever finds it. He signs a $40 million deal with Nike. It's the biggest in golf history for a newcomer. They roll out a tagline. "Hello, world." Tiger chuckles at the phrase. It feels a little off. He wasn't saying hello. He was already here. The media wants a savior. Golf wants a messiah. The sponsors want a brand that breathes. But Tiger? He just wants to win. The PGA Tour swells around him like an ocean around a storm it doesn't yet understand. Other golfers glance at him with a mix of curiosity and confusion. He's respectful, laser-focused, dismissive of distraction. He doesn't party, doesn't cavort. He disappears after rounds into cold tubs and stretching bands, film study, phone calls to his father. And always, the swing. Always, refining it. Each movement is still haunted by drills from childhood. The quiet critiques. The camera on the tripod. Now, there are more cameras. But the eyes haven't changed. He wins just months after turning pro. The Las Vegas Invitational. In a playoff. No nerves exposed. Just rhythm. And when he lifts the trophy, it's not the trophy he's thinking about. It's validation. Not of greatness, but of readiness. There's another moment, smaller, easier to miss. He walks the range before a big tournament, headphones in, blocking out the gray murmur of rivals around him. But not their fear. He can almost feel it. This young man with the power of a linebacker and the touch of a painter. They don't see raw talent. They see inevitability. In interviews, he remains polite. Skilled. But more than anything, controlled. He knows now. He's not just playing golf. He's performing for a world hungry to claim something, someone, as its miracle. But miracles are usually softer. Gentler. Tiger doesn't move like a miracle. He moves like precision. There's an early quote from an old-school golf journalist. He says, "Tiger doesn't blink. And when he hits a shot, it's not about celebration. It's about correction." He's always editing. Always elevating. It sticks. Because it's true. Within weeks, crowds at tournaments begin to swell. Not slowly. Like floods. Bodies lining every fairway just to glimpse a swing born in shadows. And Tiger lets them. Not with grins. Not with waves. But with execution. With silence. With the kind of calculated dominance that makes people lean forward without realizing they're leaning. The PGA takes notice. Ratings spike. Club memberships rise. And already, the question begins to form. Can he save this game? Tiger hears it. Doesn't answer. Because predictions don't shape destiny. Reps do. Rounds do. Discipline does. Hello, world, wasn't a welcome. It was a warning. The boy they called a prodigy was no longer a promise. He was a presence. And the silence he brought with him? It was about to get loud. April 1997. The air at Augusta carried a kind of stillness, not of peace, but of tradition. For decades, this course had been guarded by history, shaped by hands that didn't invite change quickly. The greens were precise, the rules unwritten and strict. And that week, a 21-year-old black and Asian man walked onto those sacred grounds with a bag full of irons, in silence. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. Tiger Woods didn't play angry. He played certain. From the first tee shot, people knew. Not because he blew them away, but because of how calm it all looked. Unbothered by the weight of it. The moment. The whispers. The fragile idea that maybe someone like him didn't belong here. Every day, the margin widened. He wasn't just leading, he was rewiring the way golf could be played. By Saturday, the televisions in every clubhouse across the country were turned up. People who didn't know golf, who didn't watch golf, were suddenly glued to every frame. Every swing, every glance. There's a kind of quiet you earn when doing something no one's ever seen before. But Tiger's wasn't showy. He didn't dance after birdies. He didn't shout into the sunlight. He walked. He watched. He executed. On Sunday, he wore red. A tradition not passed down, but invented. Not to provoke, but to claim something. That final round became a procession. The lead was too wide. The chase was gone. But still, he didn't relax. Because this wasn't about winning the Masters. It was about saying something profound without words. He tapped in the final putt, and history moved. 18 under par. A 12-shot victory, the largest in Masters history. But when he raised his arms, there was no scream. No wild smile. Just relief. Decades of expectation. His father's voice in every swing. The eyes that followed him through childhood locker rooms, the silence of being first in so many rooms, and now, finally, a breath let go. The crowd roared, the game shifted, but Tiger simply hugged his father. Earl's face was wet, his voice cracked. "You did it," he whispered, maybe to his son, maybe to the image he'd carried for years. And for the first time, the country club gates, long built to keep history tidy, had to open wide. Because a new history was now growing roots. Reporters didn't know how to write it. Pundits searched for comparisons, but there weren't any. There was only this young man, barely out of college, who had just conquered the most sacred course in golf like it was the home course behind his childhood street. He went to the press room after. Polite, calm, still in control. But the questions were louder now. What will he do next? Can he do it again? The performance had begun to feed the pressure. The legend was no longer forming, it had arrived. From that Sunday on, every pair of golf shoes that stepped inside Augusta would walk through the memory of that week. 21 years old, alone at the top, and still just beginning. Later that night, when the cameras were done, Tiger sat quietly with his green jacket in his lap. He didn't stare at it, just folded it carefully, because this wasn't the end of anything. It was the start of everything. And nothing would be quiet again. Fame didn't feel like a blessing. It felt like armor. Everywhere he went, people stared, asked, reached for something. A photo, a signature, a piece of myth. The boy from the backyard had become a symbol. Broadcast, endorsed, dissected. And slowly, he stopped trying to correct them. The world had made up its mind about who he was. A wonder. A machine. Flawless. So he gave them what they wanted. He built a perimeter around his life. Not a wall, but a system. Structured days. Curated appearances. Laughter saved for small rooms. Trust trimmed down to a handful of names. Most people didn't notice. They saw the results, wins stacking like bricks. Trophies lined up like timestamps. And in press conferences, he was perfect. Polite, clever, guarded. Because the camera didn't want honesty. It wanted continuity. And Tiger gave it that. Gave it better than anyone. But somewhere, between global stardom and hotel keycards, something quiet started to shift. He stopped going out when he didn't have to. Dinners became room service. Conversations became statements. He wasn't unhappy, just distant. Being great had a way of stripping away the unnecessary. And eventually, the human. He was still winning. Still entering tournaments as the one to beat. Still showing up to courses like a storm with iron for thunder. But joy? Joy was rare now. Reserved for perfect rounds and quiet drives between stops. Everything else felt like choreography. He didn't mind. This was the life he'd trained for. But training couldn't prepare you for people wanting you to be more than real. He could no longer just play. He had to represent Black excellence, Asian heritage, golf's salvation, corporate loyalty, polished masculinity, perfection in form. That's a heavy swing, one burdened by 100 invisible expectations. So he made his routines tighter, his circle smaller, his face calmer. He worked out more, harder, longer. Muscle became armor, too. Pain was ignored, stiffness massaged into rhythm. It didn't matter. He couldn't afford to be injured, which meant he didn't allow himself to feel injured. He did interviews on autopilot, posed without blinking, answered without revealing. Everything was clean, flawless, unreal. And still, the trophies came. He was dominant in a way golf hadn't seen before. Not just winning, but undoing others. Changing how courses were designed. Altering how opponents prepared. Forcing the game to evolve around him. But when the cameras blinked away, he was quieter than ever. Not lonely, just alone. Each day had a purpose. Each match had a goal. But the man inside the icon was harder to reach. Even for himself. After wins, he'd celebrate briefly. Shake hands. Accept praise with a nod. But something about joy no longer landed. It slid off his skin like water on wax. Because you can't smile wide when your life's been boiled down to performance. To output. To precision. He didn't complain. Never would. But somewhere in the silence of those years, in the weight room, the practice greens, the antiseptic hotel rooms with blackout curtains, Tiger wasn't just maintaining greatness. He was disappearing inside it. And there came a moment, small, unnoticed, where even he couldn't tell where the craft ended and the person began. His swing was perfect, his schedule exact, but the mirror held more questions now. Because what good is greatness if it never lets you rest? If winning is the only language people understand you in? He kept going, did the work, crushed fields, signed deals, but when he walked alone down fairways, the crowd roaring behind ropes, he wasn't hearing the noise anymore. He was listening for something else. Something smaller, maybe himself. He won everything, not just once, but over and over, like a song that knew no wrong note. From 2000 to 2008, Tiger didn't play golf. He dictated it. Opponents tried. They trained harder, hired swing coaches, practiced longer. Still, they watched him walk away, again and again, trophies under arm, history at his heels. It wasn't domination, it was orchestration. Every major championship became part of a larger composition. The Tiger era, an era of pin-seeking poetry, of shots that bent physics and baffled doubters. And yet, the sound of that era wasn't loud. It was muted, soft galleries holding their breath. The sharp strike of iron into ball, echoing like a bell across rolling fairways. The meticulous inhale before his swing. The precise hush just after impact. Even the winds whispered. More than a dozen majors. Dozens of victories. But inside, Tiger was growing distant from the one thing that had defined him. Joy. He rarely celebrated. Joy was unpredictable. Joy could falter. So he trusted discipline instead. He won the 2000 US Open at Pebble Beach by 15 strokes. 15. But when asked afterward how it felt, he spoke like a man assessing clean data, not ecstasy. Because emotion couldn't be trusted. Only execution could. His schedule was relentless. Early drives, rain delays, obligations, tour buses, cold tubs, interviews. From sunrise to midnight, every hour accounted for. Rest was a function, not a luxury. And even with millions watching his every step, he moved alone. Always alone. He got better at it. At insulating. At keeping the version of himself the world wanted on a leash. Ready to perform, ready to answer. How does it feel to be the best? He smiled, replied with something humble, measured. But he never really answered. Because the answer changed. Some mornings, it felt like armor. Other mornings, like lead. There were quiet signs, subtle shifts, a kind of stiffness in his interviews. A mask harder to hold at certain angles. He still smiled when cameras were on. But the ease beneath was gone. People didn't notice. Not really. They just saw the next win. And the next. British Open, Masters, PGA. Chasing records one at a time. Then two at a time. Nicholas in his sights. Immortality within reach. But greatness asks for everything. And he gave it everything. Back pain started to whisper. His knees swelled. His body asked questions his mind refused to hear. Keep going. Win more. Clamp the pain below the swing plane. Once, he won a US Open with a torn ligament and a double stress fracture. He limped between shots, grimaced behind smiles, but never quit, because that's what greatness demanded. Silence in the face of pain. The media called it heroic. He said little. Inside, he was running out of room to hide. Work became recovery. Recovery became strategy. Strategy became survival. And somewhere along the line itself blurred. Did he still love the game? Or did he just know how to serve it? There were days when even his own swing, so admired, so imitated, felt foreign. Like something that had belonged to someone else. So he watched tape, rebuilt strokes, found solace in angles and repeatability. Isolation as architecture. But even architecture cracks. Even walls bear weight too long. And though there were no tears, no visible unraveling, the fall had already begun. Quiet as the rise. It started with a crash. Not a swing, not a shot, not a roar from the gallery. Midnight, Florida, November 2009. A Cadillac SUV. A fire hydrant. A tree. The world didn't understand what had happened, not at first. All they knew was that their icon was hurt. That Tiger Woods, so steady, so invincible, had been pulled from his wrecked car with blood on his face and silence in his eyes. The headlines arrived fast, faster than the facts. They called it an accident, then a scandal, then an unraveling. One by one, the stories leaked. Names, dates, messages, hotels, a private life laid bare for the whole world to dissect. Not because they cared about the truth, but because they craved the fall. The man who had built his image on silence, on control, now watched that control torn apart by tabloids and glare. Late-night hosts made jokes. Experts speculated. Brands pulled away one by one, like leaves falling from a tree that had stopped pretending it could still hold them. For years, Tiger had been everything to everyone, a symbol of grace, power, excellence. Now, he was a lesson. A cautionary tale about ego, secrecy, self-destruction. But the story wasn't about infidelity. It was about identity. About what happens when a person becomes a myth, and then no longer fits inside the lines of that myth. Behind the shame, behind the endless coverage, there was still a man. Bruised, humbled, and, most of all, confused. Not because he didn't understand what he'd done, but because for the first time in his life, he wasn't performing. He wasn't managing the image, or protecting the brand. He was just there. A father explaining hard truths to his children. A former champion pulling down the blinds to keep the cameras out. A son realizing that the hardest part of greatness isn't achieving it. It's surviving it. He took time away. Publicly vanished. No practice rounds. No clubs. Just absence. In that absence, silence returned. Not the kind that encourages focus, but the kind that confronts you. That asks questions you don't want to answer. Who am I if I'm not winning? Who am I now that the applause is gone? Old friends didn't know what to say. Acquaintances vanished. Even fans, once unwavering, turned hesitant. The weight of disappointment was heavier than trophies. But in that ruin, there was something strange. Something unfamiliar. Not peace, but honesty. For the first time, Tiger didn't have to be the best. He didn't have to be anything except real. He started therapy, talked more, looked inward in a way the game never required. There were days he didn't recognize himself in the mirror. Hair thinner, eyes older, no cameras waiting, just a man in sweatpants, figuring out what it means to be human in the aftermath of a storm. The comeback wasn't on his mind. Comebacks are for stories. This was reconstruction, not of swing, not of strategy, of self, something he'd never had time or permission to build before. And so, the noise faded. Not because the world stopped watching, but because he stopped caring whether they were. There is a different kind of strength in that silence. A quiet that no major championship can offer. And in that quiet, for the first time in his life, Tiger Woods began to breathe. The world kept moving. Tournaments went on without him. New stars rose. Television found fresh faces. But for Tiger, time slowed to something unfamiliar, something still. No buzz of crowds. No flash of cameras. Just therapy appointments and walks around a quiet house. He didn't touch a club for months. Not because of injury. Not at first. Because his body wasn't the part that had broken. There were mornings he could barely get out of bed, not from pain, but weight. Shame. Confusion. A strange kind of grief for the life that used to make sense, even if it was never soft. His days shrunk. Wake. Coffee. Silence. A few interviews to control the damage. A few jogs that never lasted long. The phone didn't ring much. And when it did, it wasn't the calls he used to get. No hype, no offers. Mostly friends checking in with voices that carried both care and distance. He knew what they didn't say. That he was no longer untouchable. He went to rehab, sat in group therapy circles with strangers who'd also broken things, families, promises, themselves. He didn't speak much at first. Listening was easier. Eventually words came, not about golf or fame, but about fear, loneliness, the pressure to be someone without flaws. For so long, he believed perfection was protection. That control meant safety. And now, he was learning how to rebuild without the armor. Not fast, not clean, but real. His body reminded him how quickly time had passed. He needed surgery, then another. Knees, back, joints that had begged for rest years ago now demanded repair. There were days he walked with a limp, small and silent. Nights when sleeping hurt. He began journaling, writing things his younger self never had time to feel. There were pages full of questions. Pages filled with simple joys, a sunrise through his window, a long shower with no schedule. The swing didn't call to him. Not yet. What called instead was stillness. The kind he'd feared, but also, maybe, the kind he'd needed all along. Publicly, he was still a headline. Privately, he was just a man. A father folding laundry. A friend learning how to apologize. Someone discovering that being extraordinary didn't mean being full. Sometimes, he sat and watched footage of his younger self, winning, grinning, moving like the world couldn't touch him. He didn't envy that boy. He pitied him. All that speed, all that power, and nowhere to place pain. Now he had space. To feel it, to grieve it, to name it. There was no rush to get back. People started saying maybe he wouldn't return at all. Maybe this was it, the quiet end. But inside that quiet, something lingered. Not ambition, not legacy. Something smaller. Hope. Not loud. Not certain, just enough to get out of bed again the next day. To try, to walk a little farther. To imagine, just imagine, that maybe a comeback wasn't a return to what he lost, but a path to something he'd never known. Peace. His back wasn't just hurt, it was broken in ways most couldn't see. Nerve pain down his legs. Spasms that woke him in the middle of the night. Some mornings, he couldn't tie his own shoes. Some nights, he couldn't sleep at all. He had played through pain before. But this was different. Doctors described bone pressing on nerves. They used words like degeneration, fusion, risk. He heard them all and nodded. Still, calm on the outside, but inside, a question pressed harder than pain. What if I'm done? The thought was quiet but relentless. He considered retirement more than once. Not dramatically, not with an announcement, just the slow acceptance that maybe the body had finally closed the door the soul refused to. But something wouldn't let him go. A flicker, a pulse, not of glory but of unfinished work. And so, he gave himself to repair. Another surgery, the biggest one yet, spinal fusion, the kind that made some men walk straighter, and others never swing again. He didn't put a timeline on recovery. Just small goals. Walk to the mailbox, stretch without flinching, sit with the kids through a whole movie. And when the swing returned, it didn't arrive with fanfare. Just a club in the garage. A short iron. One ball. He swung carefully, slowly. The motion was hesitant, but the contact, it hummed. And in that sound, quiet and honest, something returned. Not the old self, but a new one, a different one. This Tiger wasn't chasing margins. He wasn't shaving seconds off tee times or obsessing over shot shape. He was relearning how to move, how to swing with gratitude, not just precision. There were setbacks, pain that flared without warning, days he couldn't walk afterward, nights when the stillness of healing felt almost cruel. But he stayed the course. Not because he needed to win, but because he needed to try. Others saw it too. Veterans of the game, once rivals, began to call it something sacred. This wasn't a comeback. This was resurrection. Crowds returned, slowly, respectfully, watching him warm up like you watch an old piano being tuned, careful, hopeful, reverent. He spoke differently now, still measured, still private, but with a grace sharpened by suffering. I missed it, he admitted once. Not the fame, just this, competing. But even there, the hunger had changed. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about presence. Round by round, day by day. He tested himself, not recklessly, just constantly. And when he made a cut in a major again, the roar sounded like home. It wasn't the leaderboard that mattered. It was the walk, down fairways once out of reach, up hills his surgeon warned him about, across bridges built from both pain and prayer. And fans didn't chant his name like before. They whispered it, as if afraid to disturb whatever miracle they were witnessing. He tapped in for par and nodded softly to the gallery. No fist pump, no show, just thanks, because survival isn't loud. And redemption is rarely announced. It arrives like this, a man swinging again, not just for the win, but for the right to keep going. He used to dream of trophies, of perfect rounds, of walking off the 18th green with another record, another roar. That was the shape of purpose back then, measured in wins, polished in press rooms. But now, he dreams of mornings, of pancake batter on the stove, of backpacks zipped and shoes tied not with urgency, but with care. Of little voices calling, Dad, not to impress him, but because they want to be near him. He never imagined fatherhood would feel like stillness. But it does. And it's a stillness he spent decades running past. There's a photo, just a regular one. No trophies, no swing. Just Tiger and his children, sitting cross-legged on a couch, watching cartoons. Eyes soft, shoulders leaning against each other. You wouldn't look twice if you passed it on a mantle. But it means everything, because that couch, those cartoon mornings, they weren't props for a comeback. They were the reason to heal at all. Tiger had seen what distance did. He knew the cost of being absent, even if it was wrapped in success. So now, he shows up. School pickups, recitals, weekend tournaments where he's the one in the folding chair, cheering, not for birdies but for effort. For joy. He doesn't teach golf unless they ask. And sometimes, they do. He keeps it simple. grip, posture, breath, but mostly, he teaches listening. To your body, to the moment, to each other. Because that's what he had to relearn, too. The world still talks about his swing, his records, his comeback, but his children? They talk about his pancakes. About the way he makes them laugh in the car. About movie nights where he falls asleep before the credits. To them, he isn't a champion. He's just dad. And that's the legacy he didn't know he was training for. Sometimes, late at night, he steps outside and just stands in the backyard. Same air, same silence, but now, it wraps him differently. Not like pressure, like peace. He used to chase the perfection of a swing. Now, he chases presence. Not to win anything, just to be here, fully, completely. And on some mornings when the sun is coming up slow and the house is still, he picks up a club. Swings once. Not hard, not perfect, just enough to feel the rhythm. Then he sets it down. Heads inside. Because the greatest thing he'll ever shape now isn't a swing, it's who he is when the game is done. 2018 arrived like a quiet test. Tiger wasn't supposed to contend anymore, that was the sentiment. Whispers in the press rooms, murmurs along the fairways. His body, fused and scarred, had endured too much. The game had moved on. But still, he swung. Not loud, not flashy, just steady. Tournament by tournament, something began to happen. Cuts made, rounds climbed, and then, East Lake. The Tour Championship. Hot Georgia air. Crowds thicker than they had been in years. He stepped onto the course with a stillness that didn't ask permission. No announcement, no bravado, only breath. By Saturday, he had the lead. By Sunday, the gallery had swelled beyond recognition. Tens of thousands, lining fairways 5 deep, waiting. Hoping, believing. Every shot felt intentional. Every glance, deliberate. He was older now. Slower in stride, but more rooted. And the swing? It sang. When he stood over his final putt on 18, the silence wasn't quiet. It was reverence. He sank it, fist clenched, eyes closed, not in conquest but in relief. The crowd roared, louder than it had in years. And behind him, they came. A sea of people pouring through the ropes. Running, not just fans but witnesses. They didn't flood the course because of what happened that day. They did it for everything before. For the surgeries, the shattering, the silence. It wasn't just a win. It was a resurrection made visible. He raised both arms, not toward the scoreboard, but toward the weight he'd just let go of. Afterward, reporters asked if he felt back. He smiled. I'm just lucky to be here. And he meant it, because this wasn't a statement. It was a chapter, written carefully, patiently, with scar tissue and breath. He didn't need validation, but he earned it, not with dominance, with survival. And that Sunday in Atlanta, for the first time in a long, long time, he looked happy. It was April again. Georgia's sun drifting through pine needles, warm and weightless. Augusta National wearing its usual disguise, perfect, endless, unmoved. But something under the surface had shifted. Because this time, he wasn't the future. He was the memory. 43 years old, back fused, knees learned to lie, swing tighter now, more architecture than dance. But still, his. He arrived without the demand. Without the script that said, favorite. Without expectation heavy enough to crack the green. All he brought was rhythm. Day 1, steady. Day 2, closer. Not in surges but in presence. He studied each lie like a puzzle, walked every fairway like it owed him answers. And quietly, slowly, the leaderboard bent toward him. He wasn't the longest, wasn't the flash, but he belonged. And as he climbed into Sunday, something impossible began to stir, not just in him, but in the galleries, those faces lined along the ropes, older now, too. They remembered the dominance, the unraveling, the silence. And now, this echo of grace. 12 years had passed since his last major win. That's more than a lifetime in golf. But legacies wait. And at Augusta, legacies speak louder than time. Day 4 was pure tension, like the course itself was holding a breath. Birdies traded, leaders fell, and Tiger stayed, not forcing, just waiting. And then came Amen Corner. 2 collapsed ahead, the path opened, and Tiger didn't chase it. He walked through it, deliberate, focused. The swing on 16, pin high, soft right, spun 2 inches. The crowd exhaled like an orchestra leaning into a final note. By 18, he led alone. The gallery swelled. People stood 5 deep, rows of fathers holding sons, friends gripping friends. Because they all knew what was happening. Not just a win, a return. The putt dropped. And Tiger, so often center stage, let out the smallest sound. A yell, cracked with disbelief. Not rehearsed, not for cameras. Real. He hugged his caddy, his son, his mother. The moment folding suddenly into itself. This man who had once stood alone at the top, now wrapped in something warmer than glory. Family. Redemption doesn't come with fanfare. It arrives quietly, earned through years no one clapped for. After the trophy, after Butler Cabin, after the jacket pulled onto his shoulders again, someone asked what it meant. He didn't answer quickly. He just looked out at the course, small smile, eyes distant. Then he said, "It means everything." And this time, everyone understood. Not because of the win. Because of the climb back to it. It happened again. Morning light fractured across another crash scene, this time in California. February 2021, a winding road, a borrowed SUV. A moment too fast, too sharp, and suddenly, quiet. The photos spread first. Crumpled metal, a hillside, tire tracks sketched into soil. Then the reports. Compound fractures. Shattered ankle. Pins. Screws. Speculation. And silence. Tiger wouldn't play again. Couldn't. Might not walk again. Might not keep his leg. The whispers returned before his voice did. But he didn't speak much, not right away. Because this wasn't about the comeback. Not this time. This was about staying alive. Emergency surgery. Months in a hospital bed. A wheelchair. Months more learning how to use his own feet again. How to shift weight. How to stand. Not to swing. To walk. The bed became his field. The walker, his caddy. Everything shrunk. No golf. No press. Just recovery. Quiet, painful, relentless. He watched tournaments from the couch. Recorded them. Paused the screen like he used to pause film of his own swing. But this time with no critique. No plan. He wasn't analyzing anymore. He was remembering. And in those hours, feet elevated, stitches aching, his relationship to the game changed. He missed it. Not the lights or the noise. Just the feel. The conversation a good round has with silence. He began therapy again. For the leg. For the mind. The questions returned, gentle but steady. Would he ever tee up again? He didn't answer them. Not because he couldn't, but because he was busy doing what people had stopped asking for. Healing. They said it was over. Finishing like this made sense. Tragic, maybe. But poetic. The car crash that bookended the rise, the fall, the resurrection. But they forgot something. Tiger doesn't retire. Not formally. Not spiritually. He never has. Weeks passed. Then months. The boot came off. The limp shrank. The swing, rebuilt, again. Not for torque. Not for distance. For rhythm. He played with his son. 9 holes. Light bags. Quiet smiles. He walked the fairways slower now. Ankles stiff. Scars cracking under socks. But he walked them. And that, in some small way, was victory. He knew the majors were no longer an expectation. Maybe not even a possibility. But that wasn't the point. Presence had become the goal. Being there. Feeling it again. Swings. Shaped not by hunger, but by gratitude. He never announced a retirement. Because there was no need. The course still welcomed him. Even if the roar had become a whisper. Even if the Sunday red came with shadows under the eyes and tape under the shirt. He teed up again, not to win, to belong. And when people saw him, swinging with resolve, limping without apology, they didn't cheer like before. They watched, softly, hopefully, because greatness has many forms. Stillness is one of them. Survival is another. And peace, after all of it, is the rarest of all. Legacy doesn't arrive all at once. It builds, quietly. Moment by moment, swing by swing, not in celebration, but in the silence that follows it. Tiger knows this now, not because of the records, not because of the green jackets or the 15 majors, but because of the spaces in between. Legacy isn't a trophy, it's what echoes when the gallery is gone, what your children remember when they tell their own stories, what remains after the headlines fade. He used to measure it by numbers. 82 PGA Tour wins. 11 Player of the Year awards. Weeks ranked number 1, 683 of them. But those answers no longer satisfy the deepest questions. Not for him. Now he thinks about those who came after. The way young black golfers enter clubhouses with their heads up, not down. The juniors who see someone who looks like them on the wall, and feel less alone. He sees it at clinics, where kids don't ask about swing mechanics. They ask what to do when they're scared. When the crowd is too loud. When they don't feel like they fit. And he answers honestly. Not like a champion, like a witness. Tells them it isn't about being fearless. It's about swinging anyway. He mentors now. Quietly. With clarity. He shows up at the Hero World Challenge. Laughs with players half his age. Walks like a man who no longer needs to place first to feel whole. He founded a foundation, built a curriculum, gave his name to schools not with fanfare, but with intention. Because a swing can change a game, but education can change a life. There are moments, now, when he walks alone on a course after hours, not to practice. Just to be. A tee in his hand. Grass soft underfoot. No pressure. Only presence. He thinks sometimes of Earl. Of those early mornings, the whispered promises. He's a father now, too. He knows what it means to believe harder than the world dares to. And to hope your child becomes not what you dreamed, but who they are meant to be. Tiger doesn't chase ghosts anymore. Doesn't fear slumps or silence. Because legacy lives in the long finish. In persistence. And in peace. He still plays. Sometimes. When the body allows. But he smiles more now. Doesn't hide the limp. Doesn't pretend the pain isn't there. Because truth, finally, sits beside him like an old friend. And as the sun moves gently behind the hills of the course he built, quiet, golden, he watches a new round begin. With new players, new names, new hopes. His time at the center has passed. But his presence remains, not in noise, but in the hush before a swing. There's an image, not a moment caught on national television. Not a highlight loop, not a victory lap. Just a photo, low resolution, grainy, quiet. Tiger sits on a bench near the edge of a driving range. Late afternoon, nobody milling around. Just shafts of light cutting through long grass. His elbows rest on his knees. His hands hang relaxed. No glove, no club, no camera in sight. It's not remarkable. And that's what makes it sacred. Because this is what remains when everything else falls away. No leaderboard, no chase, only breath, only stillness. He doesn't need to prove anything now. Not to fans, not to critics, not even to himself. The climb is done. The fire that once demanded perfection now keeps him warm for quieter things. Like watching his son swing. There's legacy in that, too. Not in replication, but in retrieval. In giving back a part of childhood that he himself never had. Charlie swings loose, feet just right. He doesn't try to mimic his father, but the rhythm is there. Honest, unforced. Tiger watches him, not with critique. With awe. He claps when it's good. Laughs when it's not. Offers little tips. Not too much. Not too little. Because now, the point isn't mastery. It's memory. Time has done its work. The sharp lines have softened. The urgency has lifted. He knows he once carried golf on his back. Now, he walks beside it. A peer. An elder. An echo. At events, young players nod deferentially. Some ask for advice. Others just want to be near him. The stillness, the gravity, the way presence can teach louder than language. He shakes hands, takes pictures, but he no longer needs the stage. He knows now. Greatness is a current that keeps flowing long after the name has drifted downstream. In private moments, he jokes more. Lets himself be silly. Friends who've known him for decades see it, something unclenched. Something softened. Peace isn't passive. It's earned. Piece by piece. Scar by scar. Swing by swing. Sometimes, late in the afternoon, when the shadows stretch long across the course, he'll find a quiet tee box. Alone. He won't announce it. Won't invite anyone. Just a few balls. An old iron. Maybe A3 wood. And he'll swing. Not to see how far. Not to prove he still can. Just to feel it. The compression of ball on face. The sigh of turf lifting. The silence after. He smiles. Not because it's perfect, but because it's enough. The boy in the backyard. The man at Augusta. The father in the gallery. All the same soul. Just different shapes. And now, no chase. No noise. Only this. A swing. A moment. And the truth that greatness, when it's done right, doesn't vanish. It simply becomes quiet. He walks differently now. Not with the power that once made crowds hold their breath, but with a kind of earned gentleness. Each step, a choice. Each motion, measured. The same man, but rewritten by experience. There are no more peaks to chase. No more records to outrun. Those battles have already been fought, some won, others surrendered. What remains is not ambition. Not even legacy. What remains is wisdom. He carries it in the way he holds a club, loose but certain. In the pauses before he speaks. In how he listens more closely than ever, not to reply, but to understand. There are young players now, sharp, hungry, sculpted by swing coaches and simulators. They wear his shoes, quote his interviews. They know the stats, the numbers, the lore. But Tiger is not their competition. He's their compass. They ask about shots he made 2 decades ago, how he saw them, how he believed in them. He answers with a half smile and a shrug. What mattered wasn't the shot. It was how still the world became when he needed it to be. He teaches that now, not with clinics or lectures. With presence. With being there when it matters, on the range, on the trail, in the moments between greatness and growth. He doesn't need to be the sun anymore. The warmth is enough. Sometimes, he watches highlights. Not the wins. Not the chip-ins or the records. The in-betweens. How he walked. How he carried pressure like fabric folded into every movement. He sees now what he couldn't then. The boy was brilliant, but the man had to learn softness. It came slowly. Through pain, loss, repair. Through fatherhood. Through silence long enough to hear parts of himself he once ignored. His laugh is different now. Fuller, less guarded. His words, more deliberate. As if the years taught him that saying less sometimes reveals more. He doesn't cling to the past. But he respects it, because only by walking through it, step after damaged step, did he earn the right to stand still now. And smile. Journalists still ask if he'll win another major. He doesn't flinch, doesn't promise. He just says, we'll see. Not coy, just honest. There's power in no longer needing the victory to feel whole. Power in showing up anyway. His children sometimes ask what his proudest moment was. He doesn't talk about Augusta, about Pebble, about the streaks or the shots. He talks about coming back, Not to the game, but to himself. Because in the quiet after all the noise has died down, that's what remained. A man who once built a swing to conquer the world. And later, a life that didn't need to. The grass is wet, not from rain, but from time, from air, from the quiet weight of morning. Tiger walks it slowly, shoes soft against the dew. A small path curves ahead, familiar, worn by years of repetition. Each step is slower now, but not hesitant. More deliberate, more knowing. A marshal nods. A groundskeeper waves. They don't shout. They don't need to. Some faces he doesn't recognize anymore. Others, he's known longer than silence itself. They smile, not because he's famous, because he's endured. At the clubhouse, someone has already poured the coffee. Light, just how he likes it. He doesn't sit right away. Instead, he looks out through the window, toward the first tee, toward the shadows stretching long across the green, toward a memory that hasn't stopped unfolding. It isn't about what's behind him anymore. It's about how long he stood in front of it. He thinks of the boy, barefoot in a California backyard, holding a club too big for his hands. The boy wasn't dreaming of masters. He was chasing stillness, trying to shape focus out of air. He remembers that version now. Not as a stranger, as a route. There's no longer a list of goals taped to the mirror. No voice pushing from the shadows. No swing coach telling him the angle was off by half a degree. Just breath and gratitude. He sips slowly, watches the sun break across the fairway, and listens. Birds somewhere in the trees. A flag rustling like paper folded in the wind. Nothing loud, no roar. And maybe that's the point. Maybe this quiet, is what he was swinging toward all along. Not the records, not the legacy, but the permission to arrive at himself. Fully, without proving, without apologizing. He places the cup down, stands, and steps out again, into light, into air, into a day with nothing required. And if someone nearby turns to look, hoping to catch that signature walk, the silhouette that carried a sport, they'll find a man instead. Not chasing, not returning, simply being. And maybe that's the final shot. Not struck with iron, but with peace.